Hi, and welcome to Love Sober Podcast, the podcast for the sober and sober curious. I'm Kate Bailey. I'm a coach, an author, and I'm a Brit mum from West Sussex. Hi, and welcome, Arlina. I'm so stoked that you're on the podcast today.
Kate, I always enjoy spending time with you. So I thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's so excellent. So, Arlena's been on the podcast before, but way back when. And well, it's just amazing. Like we've just been talking, and she has got so much going on at the moment. So it couldn't be a better time to get you back on. But you're nearly 30 years sober.
Yeah, this month on the April 23rd will be 30 years.
It's just amazing. And we've got, so Arlena's written a guide, 30 tips for 30 days, and obviously pegged to your amazing 30 years,
Yeah.
in recovery and being sober. And I mean, I can only just think what a gift that is, because what a wealth of kind of experience and, wisdom, actually. No pressure, no pressure on you.
I'm so wise and humble.
Oh, you're so excellent. 30 years, right? Well, how do you think? I mean, it must have changed, right? The recovery space, sobriety
Oh,
space. How do you see it's changed?
it's so interesting because so I got sober um my official date was like April 23rd of 94. It took me a couple months to get that date after 2 years of trying to moderate. So I'll just qualify with that. And really, the 12-step program was the only thing that was available when I first got sober. There really was nothing else, right? So I spent years and years, doing that program, absolutely loving it. It was hard sometimes, and the people can be challenging, and the wrestling with myself was challenging. But about 8 years ago, I decided to start a recovery podcast, which is the One Day at a Time Recovery Podcast. And it opened my eyes to, because I was sort of living in this 12-step bubble. I was happy in my little pink A bubble. And then I started doing the podcast and was exposed to all these different ways that people were getting sober. I interviewed a gal who got sober through yoga.
Mm.
There were people getting sober through Dharma recovery, smart recovery. What's the religious one? Celebrate recovery. There were all these different sort of like, there was like, they're kind of like spin-offs of the
Mm.
12 steps, which really told me that there were all kinds of people that didn't resonate
Mm.
with sort of the 12-step program, and that there were all these other pathways, which was, it was both exciting and alarming to me because I was sort of conditioned to a
Mm.
certain way of thinking. So it really made me challenge my thinking. And now there are just so many different kinds of support groups. There's some for women, there's some for men, I mean, and everybody in between, right? There's
Yeah,
just all different kinds of, and I think it's so important because we need to meet people where they're at, right?
yeah.
It's like a spectrum. There are these people that are, just sort of feeling like it's not, alcohol is not working in their life anymore, but like most of their life is working,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
But they just want to stop for like optimize their life and whatever. And then there's the people on the other end of the spectrum that are like wrestling with life and death,
Yeah.
right? That's kind of where I was used to living, in
Mm.
this realm of people that were just so dysfunctional that they were, it was a matter of life and death, right? So I'm excited and happy and hopeful to see that there are different programs to meet people all along the spectrum now, where there wasn't when I first got
Mm.
started. It was just sort of, here you go. There's rehab, and then there's 12 step, and
Mm.
that was pretty much it.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. When you say that, and I think you've put that so articulately, that kind of the whole spectrum of what's available now for almost the spectrum of alcohol use disorder. now that we
Yeah.
have a different language around it, right? Alcohol use disorder instead of you're an alcoholic, you know. And I know for me when I stopped, like, so it's when I first stopped, even though I've been trying for decades, right? But about 11 years ago. Um, and I remember, and I was just remembering this the other day when I went on to Soberistas, which was this, alcohol-free blogging site.
Oh yeah.
Before all the kind of sober Instagram, before all the club sodas and all the things in the UK now, and it was still very much sort of behind closed doors, but it was like positive. I think I talked to you about that on your
Mm-hmm.
podcast.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember kind of going, when I spoke about my experience, it still felt like I was a bit of like a fake, like I didn't quite qualify for sobriety because at that point we
Oh,
didn't have that like grey area drinking. Like it was still very much like it felt like the only way you would really qualify for sobriety is if you were literally rock bottom, life or death, because that was all that was being reflected in the press, in cultural narrative, on TV, in books, you know. So I can really relate to that and feel like I kind of hit almost that first wave of when it was starting to become accessible in the UK, that there might be an early entry point to sobriety that we hadn't
right.
considered before. So
Well, I would like to suggest that the 12 steps actually do address the upper end of the spectrum. I just didn't know it.
yeah.
You don't know it until you go.
Mm,
And it's so funny because I talk to people who are super resistant to it, and then they try it, and then they go, wow, it's not what I thought it was.
mm,
Right? Like I have friends in the program that were doctors and lawyers and like high-powered executives, like really high-functioning people that had alcohol use disorder.
mm,
But I got to tell you, when I found out that I was quote unquote alcoholic, to me it was a relief. I was like,
mm.
oh my God, that's what's wrong with me. Like
Okay.
that's what's happening. It was
Mm,
such a relief to know, number one, it like wasn't my fault, right? That through a series of experiences, like the ACE, like the adverse childhood experiences, is that what it is? ACE,
yeah.
yeah,
Mm,
adverse child, yeah, that I was predisposed, right? Even
mm,
though nobody in my family had it, because of my experiences, I was predisposed. Like I learned so much about why I was the way I was, like why I couldn't control alcohol, why I was abusing it the way I did,
mm,
and so for me, it wasn't, and that's one of the things I talk about in this book I'm writing, which is the 12-step guide for skeptics, because there are these mental blocks, right? Like you were saying, like the media,
mm.
literature, like everything is portraying the rock bottom trench coat, paper bag, bottle covering, you know what I'm saying? Like the
Yeah,
real,
yeah.
like guttural, like hardcore alcoholic. But when I
Mm,
started going to meetings, there were like these beautiful women that were very polished. And I was like,
mm.
what is she doing here? Right?
Yeah, yeah.
What are you doing here? This lady, I remember I was such a crush on her. She was like this fancy businesswoman and drove a little red convertible BMW. And she always had heels and a nice bag. And
Mm,
her hair was, I was like, oh my gosh, and I asked her to sponsor me. She goes, I just got sober. I don't feel like I'm qualified yet. And I was
mm,
like, you just got sober?
mm,
Like it was mind blowing to me. But had I not gone, I never would have known that.
mm,
Right. I was still sort of, but the reason I went was because I was so desperate to stop drinking, and all the ways I had tried didn't work. And really, that was the only
mm,
path available at the time. And yeah, like I'm so glad that that was the only thing that was available, because I did submit to the 12 steps. I was like, okay, fine. I'll do, I'll,
mm.
I'll
I'll
do
take
quote
it.
unquote, I'll do the work. Fine, I'll do the work. And which
Yeah.
is, the 12 steps are largely a writing process, right? And
Mm,
you do some writing and you share it with somebody, and you get these insights about yourself. And it really, I was in such denial about so many things because I had so much childhood trauma that I had developed these defenses,
mm,
right? I was in survival mode.
Mm,
And so this was a process of helping me break through my own internal denial to see reality and with love and compassion. Like I was always surrounded with love and compassion.
mm,
And I was able to like transform. They kept saying that if you work the steps will work you. And I'm like, I don't get it. What does that even mean?
mm,
And so, yeah, and while I do really appreciate that there are so many different ways to get sober, like many paths, I do feel sad, genuinely sad that people don't have the experience because they just can't get past these
mm,
mental barriers. And the word alcoholic is probably the first
mm.
one. Like
Yeah.
the word alcoholic, the idea that it's religious or these
Mm.
ideas of like powerlessness that are often out of context
Yeah.
because it's powerless over alcohol. The truth is that we have so much power within us. But
Mm,
once we ingest alcohol, we virtually lose our power. We
mm.
lose the power of choice. But people always leave out the over alcohol part,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is something that really chaps my ass if I'm going to be if I'm going to be
Yeah.
honest.
Yeah. And it's interesting, isn't it? I love what you're saying because I am one of those people who I couldn't, like, I took myself off through the decades to AA and I couldn't access it. And I think, I find it so interesting that you were able to, understand and learn about your trauma, your adverse childhood experiences and and be able to work with it. And I know people, well, I know a few people actually who have now. But for me, I had like, yeah, the sort of the religious, and I know that you can have God as anything, right? I know that it could be good orderly direction, it can be a flower, it could be whatever you want it to be. But for me, there was something about, and interestingly, I've just started that I have got a point to this. I'm not going to just go on and on forever.
Oh, I'm with you. I'm
But
following. Yeah,
I've
yeah.
just started a yoga teacher training. I'm very, very like after my 8 years, very regular yoga practice and learning lots of the philosophy. I cannot believe this the sync the meshing with sobriety, nervous system regulation, neuroplastic healing, calming, the yoga philosophy, right? But I read a yoga book, and I will obviously like I can't remember, but it's one of the really old ones. So I didn't start with an easy one. I had to go straight to the kind of the Bible of yoga. I can't even remember what it's called. I'm such a good student. And it freaked and it fucked with my head a bit because that's what
Yeah,
I do with things. And so with
yeah,
the yeah, so with the 12 step thing, it was like I couldn't even follow a program. That was
yeah,
too fucking traumatic. It made me feel like I lost my agency too much to even follow a program. I mean, you know what I mean? It was like so rebellious, so ADHD kind of going on with
yeah,
me. But so I'm quite interested because I think actually if I rocked up to a meeting now, I'll probably quite like it. So it's
yeah.
really interesting, isn't it?
You need
And
a
I
sponsor,
probably,
let me know.
yeah, you can be my sponsor. But so there was
I'll take you
that.
through
But
that.
I wonder as well if I mean, I think as well, like I went to this meeting in Brighton and I had a fabulous next door neighbor. He was American. He was like this playwright from San Francisco who was
That's
just
cool.
the most brilliant, brilliant bloke. And he was like, right, come along with me. So I went and it was a 12, it was about the 12th step. So that was like, I hadn't gone for decades. And then I went and everyone was talking about the higher power. Can you imagine how much I was shitting myself seeing in that
But wasn't that
meeting? Because I was terrified. I was like, they were talking about the higher power. It's too weird. I'd be fine about that now, but I wasn't at the time, you
okay.
know.
Because I would think that because my experience of when people talk about the 12 step, it's like having had a
Mm,
spiritual awakening as a result of the steps. Um,
yeah.
we carried this message, and so I would imagine. I mean, most people who show up in the rooms have no God. Like they
Mm,
have no access to a quote unquote high, they call it a higher power because people get freaked out about the word God. And
mm,
to me, words are just symbols, right? We assign meaning to things. And I've heard that if you have a problem with the word God, you probably have a problem with somebody else's God. right? It's like,
Mm,
and that's what I loved about the 12 steps, because it was like you do get to come up with something that makes sense to you. Because I
mm,
grew up in the church, and the church didn't save me, right?
mm.
Like
The church
I
fucked me up.
seriously, like I didn't abandon God. I had been asking God to fix me my whole fucking life.
Mm,
And here I was. Right? Like this wasn't fixing me. So I decided that if I couldn't be good, I was going to be good at being bad.
yeah.
I was like, all right, fuck it. It's on. We're gonna go the other way. And
Mm.
I wasn't stealing or murdering. Oh, maybe stealing a little bit, but
You
you know
are
what I'm saying.
murdering.
I wasn't committing murder or anything. I wasn't super.
I want to get like I want you to tell us what you know. I don't. I don't.
I
Yeah.
know. Yeah. I was yeah. But I forgot what my point was. But the step 12, it's like I walked into meetings and people were like honest about I hated God when I first started. And then they told me that the things that I hated were not actually God, right? That they were like ideas that were imposed on me from someone else
Mm,
and that create like I had so much rebellion when it
mm,
came to the higher power thing when I first started that and I had a really good sponsor who was like, "Oh, no, don't worry about it. That's not a thing. Like this, what is it you're afraid of?" And I was like,
mm,
"All these things." And she's like, "Yeah, that's not what we're talking about."
That's
She was
great.
make two lists, everything that you want God to be, everything that you don't want God to be, or what you don't
Mm.
like about God. She had me making two lists, and then I shared it with her. She literally tore it down the half. She goes, "Burn this side, and this is now your
Oh,
understanding of a higher power." I was like, "You can do that?" I was like,
oh,
"What?"
she sounds awesome. And like
Yeah,
having that I guess that sponsor thing is like it's so important to have someone who can help mentor you
yeah,
through the process, right? Of almost interpreting this kind of what's kind of like a tome, really, isn't it? And actually it
yeah,
can help to bring it up to date, make it relevant for you, troubleshoot the
exactly.
kind of, anything that might be sticky. And it's almost like, well,
Yeah,
look, if any of this is really getting in the way, you just need to park it for a little
yeah.
bit, take a breath, go to the park, look at some flowers, go dance, have a cup of tea, go to sleep, and then maybe have a think about it tomorrow or not. Maybe you think about
Yeah.
it. I don't know.
Yeah. It was, and I had funny things that I was really resistant to. Like it really pissed me off that everything was written in he, like he
Oh,
this, he
yeah.
that.
It's not
I was
okay.
like, she's like, you can put an S in front of that if you want.
Yeah.
I was like, I can. She's like, yeah, put an S in front. It
That's
turns
what I
out I
did
did.
with my Buddhist book. I was like, I just can't read such
See? Yeah.
patriarchal language without getting so pissed off that I won't read it. I'll just be like, fuck off. It's not good
Yeah.
enough. Yeah,
And
anyway, go on.
what I learned about that, my response was a sign of trauma.
Yeah.
Right. And so she was like, let's look at that. Like, where
Mm.
is this coming from? And it was like, we'd go back to and it was so interesting because I do want to say that I did do the 12 steps, but I always did therapy.
Mm.
So I had peer support. I also
Yeah.
had professional support
Yes.
and I
Yeah.
was broke. So I don't know that I got the best therapy, but I guess I was just really in that place. Like, when they say that when the student is ready, the teacher will appear.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I was just really ready to be different. I was like, my whole life I wanted to be anybody else but me anyway.
Mm.
And so I was reading all these books. And so I was always doing more than just the 12 steps. So I just wanted to add that in there. But it
Mm.
was interesting that I feel like having a good sponsor is really important. A sponsor that can be like, well, this is what I did. So, take that information and quote, run the experiment. Like you
Yeah.
don't I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm just asking you to run the experiment and try it for
Mm.
yourself. And if that doesn't work, try something else.
Mm.
But I'll just say that, like, this is what I used to be like. And then I tried this thing, took action, mood follows action,
Mm.
right? Um, it, and and then I got a result and sort of just it wasn't like this, you have to do this. And you'll get a lot of that in 12 step, which kind of brings me to the last point about 12 at is the
Mm.
steps and the fellowship are two separate things. And just
Mm.
keep in mind the fellowship is made up of people who have mental illness to some degree, myself included,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so, sometimes, and then the other thing is they say that if you've been sober a long time, that you'll see people die from this disease,
Mm.
which I have been to more funerals than I care to admit to. But
Mm.
so there's a level of like you need to follow these rules, or they're supposed to be suggestions, but people like us get afraid when we see
Mm.
people relapse, because not everybody comes back.
No, and I feel like that's a really important kind of point about, how things have changed and all the big smorgasbord of all the different things that we can choose from now. And
Yeah.
also for me and where I was coming from, like first, it had to feel positive and something I could feel proud of. I couldn't go somewhere and say, I'm just too, I'm screwed up with.
So
But
what space did you have to share the things that you were most ashamed of?
well, I think on the sober forum, in Soberistas, but I feel like I used it differently. I feel like I wrote, um, I used to write sort of almost like into possibility with it. So I would
Hmm.
just be like reflecting on strengths. This is why I think coaching appealed to me, because it was like I had so much of that kind of feelings of lack of agency that it needed to be like that sort of trauma process where you have to establish feelings of safety and connection and
Yeah.
go from a really strength-based place outside and slowly like work my way in. So I feel like I didn't have so I didn't really have anything that I was that ashamed of.
Because the
I
reason I
haven't done the
ask is
work. I
because,
so haven't done the work, have I? I'm like, no, I feel like it's that feeling of from a gender point of view and from that it was almost like I was using alcohol to cope with my neurodivergence and adverse childhood
yeah,
experience.
of
And so it was
course.
like, sweetheart, what happened to you? I'm not going to talk about what I'm ashamed of. I'm like talking about how I'm going to love hard on myself. That's where I was coming from. I don't feel
Yeah.
I don't I mean I had a few like stupid nights, but I wasn't gonna go and feel ashamed of my I just wasn't. I kind of still feel like that. I feel like self-love, self-compassion, and yeah, I don't know.
I think so. For me, there's the reason I ask
Mm,
because and it's interesting that you mentioned the safety and connection, because that's where I found when I would sit in a room and I would hear these women tell their stories,
mm,
and I'd be like, oh my God, I can't believe she did that too.
mm,
Like I would hear women talk about their shame, and that made me feel safe to talk about mine, because there's this idea that time heals all wounds. It doesn't. The pain waits until you feel safe enough that it can arise so that you can process it to resolution. And
yeah.
I don't know how you like, if you don't process it to resolution, it's like,
Mm,
I wouldn't call that, it's maybe a little bit of spiritual bypassing. I'm going to use these spiritual tools and just pretend like this stuff
mm.
doesn't exist. I needed to metabolize that shit.
Yeah,
I
yeah. And
needed
I
to
think I had
process it to
therapy. Therapy is how I
therapy. Yeah.
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 And there was a lot of
I was
therapy
going to
over the
say, because
years.
I know that you have done your work.
Yeah, no, I
I know
know
you have.
I have.
Yeah.
And so what I needed to establish some safety, be safe enough to not use alcohol, was to almost not do the work for a bit. It was like take the hunt off, take the perfectionism out of it, take the criticizing, take the hawking off yourself, and give yourself a fucking break and just be proud that you're doing this. And that's what I had to do
Yeah. Yeah.
for a
Yeah.
year or so. Just be
I did
proud of
too.
me. Just be proud of
Yeah.
me. I don't need to go seeking. I don't need to go fixing. I don't need anyone else to tell me to do the fucking work. I just need to let me be enough. That was almost like my entry point to self-compassion. And when I listened to Tara
Mm.
Brach, Reign of
Mm.
Self-Compassion,
My
oh, there's
favorite.
connections. And so since that, interestingly, I've gone back to now I know a bit more about trauma. I now have a
Hmm.
trauma-informed therapist. I've got an amazing therapist. I just love her too much. That's my second one. The first one I did some good work with, but I've got, I feel like it's really hit and miss with therapists, right? You can go
Oh, it's so hit and miss.
and it's
Yeah.
so, I have a really
Same with
good ones that I
sponsors.
can, yeah. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
it's really hit with sponsors too. Yeah.
yeah. So it's so interesting. I find this really super interesting.
Yeah,
Um,
I just have to comment about you know, this idea of safety. Like I would go to meetings and hear these women tell their stories. I wasn't sharing mine at first.
mm,
Like I would hear these things and it kind of made me feel safe to like they were really vulnerable. I'd go to these and listen, I know that not everybody has access to healthy meetings that are in person. I know that like now that all the meetings are on, there's lots of meetings on Zoom. There's more opportunities. Um, but I would hear things, and by witnessing somebody else do the work, it
mm,
affected me. So I
mm.
didn't have to take the risk. There was no
Yeah.
risk for me. And
Mm,
so I was witnessing somebody else, and because they were willing to process out loud, I was processing quietly.
mm.
So I didn't have to be vulnerable until I was ready.
And there's magic in group, right? There is a
Oh,
real
such magic.
magic because there is that co-regulation. And like you said, you can
Mm.
get to absorb, metabolize some of it until you're ready to speak it out, to be vulnerable, etc.
Yeah, and I wasn't
That
doing it
feels more
publicly at first.
more accessible.
More
And then
accessible.
you
Yeah.
and then you start a podcast and then you were like super doing it out loud.
Oh yeah. Well, listen, by the time I was doing the podcast, I got very comfortable with sharing things that I felt shame about, and I learned a lot. I just became this seeker, right? As soon as I got
Mm,
sober, it like opened up this whole new world and I became obsessed with anything self-help, right? Like
mm,
I was reading all the books and I was learning about myself, and it was just like endlessly fascinating. And because I was sponsoring other women, I was like, I'm
mm,
taking all this information in with the intention of passing it along. But I also had somebody, saying, hey, you need to apply this stuff to yourself too.
mm.
And, I recognize that sometimes I have this tendency to want to help facilitate for other as a shortcut for doing it's almost like cheating, that's for
Yeah.
not doing my own work. So it's a constant coming back to self and self-compassion and self-love, which is why I appreciate the work that you do, right?
Mm,
Because at the end of the day, it's like you can't live yourself sober, right? And that is the vehicle. And for me, I needed to metabolize a lot of stuff that happened to me in the past. And sobriety was required first because neuroplasticity happens like when you sleep and when
yes.
you're consuming drugs and alcohol, you're dysregulated, your brain, you're not actually learning.
Mm,
So it is important that and there's this idea that self-knowledge avails us nothing. Like we can learn all the things, but until you take action, you don't really see its
yeah.
cause and effect. You don't see the results.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's so true. And I feel like I'm more in that kind of sober, curious space than you are with our sort of pathways through things. And I do think that there is we were talking about the limitations, weren't we, of the kind of there's this big array, but there are some worries with that. And for me, there is a
Yeah.
slight worry tendency that, okay, well, for me, it's like you just got to be sober. Like nothing will happen unless you're sober. You can read all the books, you can do all the juice fasts, you can do all the things, you can
Right.
read,
That's true.
you can do all the Elizabeth Gilbert journaling you like, but if you're still getting pissed or on things, your neuroplasticity is not going to be happening. You are not going
Yeah.
to be, you're not going to be, it's not going to be available to you.
Yeah.
And
Your
that's
neurotransmitter circuits
just
of dopamine and serotonin
fucked.
stuff, or your cortisol levels are going to be jacked off. And
Yeah. And I think that is the just the sort of the yeah, the sort of dodgy area there of where it's like, well, like I think for
the
people who
permissiveness.
Yeah, there is, and there's a confusion for people. I think for people who actually really do need to be sober, but haven't, they're in that maybe contemplation bit,
Hmm.
that they can get knocked off balance by some of that ease around it. And I love it's difficult because again, it can be entry points for people. But I've seen I myself have got knocked off balance
Yeah.
by that, I would say, in myself. So yeah, I guess for me, like it's
It is a,
that. It's that.
it,
Just let's just cut the bullshit. It's like you just,
yeah,
if you know, right, if you've got a problem with alcohol. For
yeah,
me, there's and I went back and forward trying to moderate, even after I'd had a
right,
year sober after soberistas, but I hadn't done any of the kind of ongoing recovery work around the trauma or anything like that. So,
right.
for me, it was like, how many times am I gonna put my hand in that bush of bees because I've just read another book or a thing. And I think now I can control it, which goes back to your point about actually we are
Hmm.
powerless over alcohol. So I would now say that I am, yeah, completely. My whole of my physiology is powerless over alcohol. Because
I
if
would
I drink,
argue,
then I just, sorry, go on.
yeah.
Yeah,
I would argue that everybody is powerless over alcohol in the sense that when you ingest alcohol, it triggers a chain of chemical reactions that you cannot stop once it starts,
yeah,
right? And some people react differently towards that or not, but everybody experiences some of the same things. Things like, it raises your baseline of cortisol when you're not drinking
yeah,
so that you have more cortisol in your body, and that's one of the things that's going to compel you to drink at the end of the day. Your brain starts to think, you know what, I deserve a treat, I just need to relax. No, you need to relax because you've been ingesting alcohol and your baseline of cortisol is high,
yeah,
right? It starts to affect your dopamine circuit, right?
yeah.
If you flood your brain with too much dopamine, your brain tries to protect itself by down
Producing
regulating.
less. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, your brain is not able to it takes the uptake any of the little chemicals that allow the dopamine to enter your brain. It reduces that amount
mm,
so that you need more. So you're becoming, dependent to some degree on
yeah,
alcohol. And it's also water soluble, it's fat soluble. So it affects every cell of your brain or your body. I mean, there's just
yeah.
so what I'm saying is that everybody is powerless. Once you ingest alcohol, you're going to experience, which is the whole point why people drink it. Because it is
Yeah.
a predictable, you drink it and it gives you it's cause and effect. The cause is you
Mm,
drink it, and the effect is that you feel different.
mm,
That is the whole point of drinking in the first place.
yeah.
It's so funny. People try to, talk about how, oh, a little bit of alcohol is good for you. No, it's not. No, it's not. There is
No,
no amount of alcohol that's good for you. But I think what you were
no.
talking about, the moderation piece,
Mm,
everybody who enters sobriety needs to answer that question, can I moderate? And I
yes.
did it. I tried it for 2 years and I had to shoot every angle until I was just absolutely
Mm,
exhausted, until I could absolutely prove to myself that I'm not somebody that can moderate. And that's when I was able to
true.
go into a program of sobriety, and then that's when everything changed. So I feel like people like you and I tried to help people accelerate that moderation
Mm,
process, that experimental process, so that they can come to the conclusion,
yeah.
yes or no, faster.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's such an articulate way of putting it. And me too. I mean, I would say I did decades, but I think the
Oh, but you
really
were alone.
intensive period, yeah, was after I did the 13 months on Soberistas. And then I was like, no, I'm sure I'll be fine. It was about 18 months, 2 years. So it's a bit of similar test this,
Yeah.
test that, let's do this, let's do that, da, 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 try this, months off, a bit here and there. And I do feel like it was like, I'm fucking done. But I had to go through that. Like you said, you
Yeah.
kind of have to answer that.
Yeah. And the
Um,
benefits just do not They don't, it
And it
doesn't,
just gets worse, right? And I like William Porter wrote a brilliant book called Alcohol Explained, and
yeah.
it's like he said, and some of his things really help me and help I know help other people who like, once there's so much narrative around alcohol, so much, and it's like, okay, once you are in that space where you have all of these thoughts about it, the horse has bolted and you will never be a happy, carefree drinker. That ship
Mhm.
sailed. The best thing you could possibly do now is just not to do it, like ever.
Yeah.
It's not going to come back. You're not going to suddenly acquire this magical ability to be able to moderate. You're just not. So
Yeah.
that's it. It's this is and it's like, okay, that's the point. That's the point.
It's
Here's
a
the flag.
very
Here's
important
the
question to
stick
answer.
in the sand. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very important question to answer.
Yeah,
Can I moderate? And if the
it
answer is no,
is.
then what?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then what? And yeah, exactly.
And
And
people like you and I help people to sort of stabilize first. Like if you don't want to do, like, listen, I have a job because people won't go to 12 step.
Mhm.
That's why I have a job. I do teach classes like on self-esteem for people who have gotten sober and that they're still struggling with once you get sober, it's like once you do put the drink down, that's when the work starts.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. That's yeah.
Yeah, the work
That's
is not stopping drinking. The work is after you've stopped, how do you learn to manage your emotions? How do you
mm,
learn to deal with life on life's terms? That's when the work starts.
mm,
But there are some people, who are not going to go, which is fine. There are other ways of getting sober. And sometimes people don't want to. And you know what? We were sort of alluding to some of the problems that we see
mm,
in the new sober space, right?
mm,
I'm going to just say it, experience matters. And I realize,
mm,
being 30 years sober, that sounds like a little self-aggrandizing or whatever, like self-serving, but experience really does matter. And what concerns me is when I see somebody that's been sober for 5 or 6 months, they write books, they start podcasts, they start coaching, and it's like, wow, you have not done your own work yet,
mm,
which means that when you are presented with a client, somebody is like, oh, they get where I'm at, they can help me.
mm.
They don't have the breadth of experience to understand, like, how to work with somebody who's facing a variety of challenges.
Yeah.
Everybody is really unique. And I think it takes experience to know how to guide somebody through the specific challenges that they are facing. So
Yeah.
that's the one thing that concerns me.
Yeah. I agree. And I did have a really good point to make and I'd completely forgotten about it.
Shall we talk about menopause?
Let's let's do that. Well,
Because
again, right, because we're talking about okay, well, you've been sober for 30 years. Unless you got sober when you were three, like I think we have a midlife situation going on, and I know I
I'm
certainly
55. Yeah,
me
I've
too.
been
Well,
through menopause.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, me too. I'll be 55 this summer, so
Oh,
I have
nice.
to say, I think we're looking amazing.
Because we haven't been drinking. Alcohol is hard on the face.
It is,
Yeah.
it is.
And the
So,
teeth.
oh, so it really, really is. And I'm seeing more and more. I think it's like that thing, isn't it, as well? You get, as you grow, you get, I don't know, maybe attract clients who, or I don't know, are just kind of maybe aligned, maybe the things that we're putting out, what we're talking about, and people
Yeah.
are kind of vibing with that. And I have so much of that at the moment, this kind of midlife piece, which again, Gen X women are shouting about and going, and it feels like it's like mushrooming, like, dear God, how did we not know all this stuff about,
I
alcohol
know.
and
Yeah.
menopause, perimenopause, the effects on our endocrine system, on our hormonal health, our brain health, our bone health, our liver health. It's like, what the actual fuck was anyone ever doing peddling any alcohol to women? And then you get this bit here, which is only just starting to be talked about.
Yeah.
I'm
It's
fucking
wild.
livid.
Yeah. So, I was like in full-blown menopause and was on TikTok and found this gal talking about um it was testosterone replacement therapy for women. And I was like, what is she talking about? And after she was like, women are experiencing all these symptoms. And I was joking about, oh, do you want to talk about, right? Because brain fog is like one of the things that, I was suffering from,
Mm.
brain fog, being really tired, like zero libido. I had been super thin my entire life. And then suddenly I was like gaining all this weight in my midsection, and I hadn't really changed the way I ate, or actually I was noticing an increase in appetite and feeling more tired, but I was still doing all the things. And excuse me. And this gal was talking about, hormone replacement therapy. And I had been to two different doctors, both women, who were telling me, I was like, look, what can we do about my libido? It's like, I don't care about it anymore, but my husband still cares about it. And like, it is not happening for me. And they were like, yeah, there's nothing you can do about it, but you can get some cream or whatever so that it's not painful. And I was like, what the hell? And these are women. These are
Yeah.
women doctors telling
Oh,
me that there is
so
nothing I could do about it.
depressing.
I know. So, and then I see this gal on TikTok talking about how doctors are not taught to help women through this period of time. All they say is that, oh, they took your blood and they go, oh, you're normal,
Mm.
which means everybody at this age group, all their hormone levels drop, and that's quote unquote normal. And what I've come to understand that normal is not acceptable.
Mm.
Normal is not acceptable. And I've learned to improve the quality of my life through chemistry,
Mm.
right? There are things that we can do now to improve our health, our sexual health, our mental health through chemistry, right? And so I found somebody that would treat me with testosterone, a
Mm.
tiny little bit, and progesterone so that I could sleep through the night. It was helping me with my hot flashes, and the testosterone increased my energy. It's helping with my muscle mass, all kinds of things, not to mention my sexual health, because I was like dead from the neck down. And now that I've been treated, I feel like I'm in my 20s again. Like my
Mm.
husband and I are having like the time of our lives. Our kids are off to
I
college and we are like, hot damn, let's get these kids out of the house. It's like we're having, do you know what I mean? It's like, I thought that ship had sailed and I didn't even, are you blushing? You're adorable.
Do you know, I'm just seeing, my face is so red. I
Are
was
you
like,
having a hot flash?
I might have to go and like slap on some old estrogen because I cannot believe how red. Anyway, I have been distracted by the redness.
I just
Mm.
noticed that. I thought you were blushing because I was talking about our
No,
sexual
no,
health.
no, no, no. I'm a bit jealous.
Yeah.
I need to make my appointment and get
Yeah.
my
Get
old
your, yeah.
testosterone cream back on.
What's
Yeah,
sad is what's sad is that healthcare doesn't cover it because our
yeah.
healthcare system here does not recognize women's health as a priority. I guarantee you, if my husband went in and said he had erectile dysfunction, they'd have 10 kinds of pills. It'd be covered in insurance. It's like men's health is completely different than women's
Mm,
health.
yeah.
And so I am privileged. I can pay out of pocket for things that I feel like I need that
Mm,
insurance just isn't covering.
yeah.
But
Yeah.
it has been a life changer.
Yeah. And there is so much, isn't there, that we can do I feel like in our midlife to, yeah, to improve our quality of life and long-term health, health outcomes and take control, well, have some agency over, obviously can't predict everything. But the whole the alcohol piece with our, with the food that we eat, the protein, the
Mhm.
eating the rainbow, that
Yeah.
kind of thing, and the anti-inflammatory stuff, and being sober. And then obviously if
Yeah.
we have some able to go to some HRT and do a bit of strength training, we can
Mhm.
actually, those are some of the things that we can really do to kind of help ourselves in our midlife. And I feel like we need a public health campaign about it. And
Oh,
alcohol
absolutely.
has
We
to
really
be
do.
in the picture of that because again, I'm on some menopause forums and I did some training with the menopause school here because it just kept coming up. And and on those forums, they're amazing, but it's still like alcohol is still the elephant in the room. Like people get a bit giggly or a bit defensive, like, oh, we're going to try and take our kind of treat away from us. And I'm like, come on, like we do have to have a chat about this. This is a thing, right? If our body,
Yeah, because
if our liver's trying to metabolize a toxin, it's not metabolizing and even creating, that metabolizing the estradiol that we need.
yeah.
So it's going to make us feel shit. So we do have to be talking about it.
We really do. Yeah, the alcohol people get so upset when, I mean, people, I've seen these discussions online about alcohol and people just get really fired up about it. And I get it.
Mm.
I get it. As we get older, it's like we don't want to give up the things that feels like that we're working, like the treats, like things that bring us
Yeah.
joy. It's like if you're not far down the spectrum. But as you get older, things like sugar, flour, alcohol, these are all things that affect your mental health. And as you get older, like you have to be a little strict, like your body is not as forgiving as it used to
Yeah.
be, right? Like
Yeah.
all the things that cause inflammation, your body is just not as forgiving. So it is important to consider, I'm not able to completely eliminate sugar from my diet, but I've drastically reduced it.
Mm.
But alcohol is
Yeah.
one of those
Same
things that
here.
people get so upset about, but it has such an effect, like you were saying, on your
Mm.
hormones, on your endocrine system. So I think it's important to rule it out.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So before we end, I just want to talk. You've got your book coming out, your 12-step guide for skeptics,
Yeah.
which will link. I'll signpost your website and everything, obviously.
Yeah.
You've got your 30 tips for 30 days. Is that on your website? Can people find it there?
It is. Yeah. So I highly recommend if you do nothing else, just get the guide. It's at soberlifeschool.com. And it's an opt-in, email opt-in. You can get the guide delivered to you. And there's, I included, three things that nobody's talking about sobriety. It's like you're going to want to drink, it's not about the alcohol. Everyone thinks like alcohol is the problem. It is not. It's just a symptom. But
Mm.
but I did put 30 tips for your first 30 days because it's like some foundational stuff that you need to know. Like I wish I would have known in my first 30 days, like
Mm.
eating protein in the evening, how do you talk to your family about drinking or not drinking? There's just a bunch of little tips and tricks that just make the beginning part of your sober journey a little easier.
Mm. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I highly
That
recommend that.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic. And like I said, 30 tips for 30 days, but from someone who's 30 years sober, right? So that's pretty cool, right?
Yeah.
And you're starting a new podcast, which is the Self-Help Junkie. So just
Yeah,
tell us
listen,
quickly about that.
I am so excited about this project because I feel like there are so many of us who like I'm sure you're probably a self-help junkie too. I see all your books in your background.
Ah, yeah, so true.
Right? Like and I don't know if you do this, like I get a book or I listen to a podcast or something, and I get so excited about this information. I try to share it with my husband, and his eyes glaze over in like 30 seconds. Like
Yeah.
he's just not. So it's like sort of like we're talking about these topics that are really helpful, but we're trying to go from information consumption to taking action,
Yeah.
right? So we pick a topic, we talk about what it is, why it's important, we come up with 3 action steps,
I
right?
love it. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that we could start applying. And then we have a meeting every other week. The podcast is every other week, and then we meet every other week. Because what we want to try to do is give people like us a forum where we can come and talk about these topics, like why we're all excited about it and how it's going to help. But it's so interesting because my co-host, Janine Coulter, and I have a co-host. We do the exercises together and talk it out. And it's so interesting because I get her perspective and she'll see something I don't, or I'll see something that she doesn't. And we have like these learning, like we learn different things about ourselves as we actually do the work.
I
So
love
it's
it. That's
been,
such a great idea.
Yeah, it's just super fun. It's kind of lighthearted. We're not dealing with life and death, and you know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
not, it's
Yeah.
not trying to, it's not really, but it tends to be a lot of people in sobriety, but it's not about getting sober or anything
Mm.
like that. It's like, it's just like sharing these insights and learning about ourselves in sort of like a
Yeah.
fun, easy way.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
I love that. And so I'll link
Yeah.
that if you, yeah, I'll link that below as well. That sounds awesome. I'm going to be tuning into that for sure.
Yeah. Yay.
So thank you so much. It's been so brilliant to talk to you today, Alina. It's always a
It's so good to
pleasure.
be with you. You're such a great interviewer. And we and I mean, you're talking about all my favorite things. So thank you for
Mm,
letting me come
ditto.
and share.
Lots of love, and I'll see you soon. Thanks again.
Thank you so much.